We hear the sound of a young girl singing in her room but is interrupted by the doorbell. Rocio opens the door and finds a lady introducing herself as Giselle. She meets with her father, Roberto, and tells him she is the founder of Discover Your Dreams. She tells Roberto his daughter has the charm and talent to be in the entertainment industry and asks him to bring her in for an audition the next day. Then, Rocio's younger brother Miguel enters, capturing Giselle's eyes. The next day, Roberto takes Rocio and Miguel to a hotel room for the audition. But Giselle denies his entry and tells him to pick them up at 7 p.m. The day goes normal with the kids giving their best poses for the camera. Later, Roberto comes to pick them up but the hotel room is empty. He runs down and looks around the street but no sign of them. In a house in California, Ernst browses pictures and videos of children. A van is parked a few meters from the house and Homeland Security are monitoring the browsing details. As soon as the guy uploads the pictures on a website, Tim and his team go in and arrest him. They also find several toys and personal files of each child. As they return to the base, his team partner, Chris, is visibly upset after what he saw during the raid and tells Tim he might not want to continue the job. Chris asks Tim how many pedophiles he has caught till now, to which Tim answers 288 proudly. But when Chris asks him how many child victims he has rescued, Tim tries to explain that most of the victims are in other countries, but as Chris walks off, his words still linger in his mind. Tim writes a detailed video evidence report watching the videos confiscated. Tim is deeply upset and emotions take over. Tim approaches Ernst in his cell and invites him outside away from the CCTV. He strikes up a conversation and pretends to be someone who has been fantasizing about it after watching all the videos over the years. He even quotes a line from Ernst's book to gain his trust. Back in the cell, Ernst gives a triumphant smile. The next day, Tim asks his boss for 1 week to execute his plan. Trusting Tim, the boss agrees to 1 week. Tim releases Ernst and takes him home himself. Over a cup of tea, he requests Ernst to get him a child while he deals with Homeland Security. Ernst meets with someone and exchanges some files, not knowing that they are being photographed by Tim's men. Later, Tim and Ernst meet up at a small restaurant where Ernst hands him a book. When Tim opens it, there is a picture of Miguel, the young boy from Honduras who was kidnapped earlier with his sister. After getting the details, Tim, with a smile on his face, tells Ernst that he is under arrest for a crime against children. The next day, Tim and his team are waiting at the border checkpoint. Tim tells a van to pull up, driven by the man photographed with Ernst earlier. Miguel is seated behind looking frightened. Tim tells his men to arrest the guy, ignoring his excuses. He approaches the little boy carefully and tells him to come with him. At the hospital, the doctor tells Tim that Miguel has been abused just recently and has lacerations. He then takes him to dinner and while having small talk, Tim tells him his name and says he can call him Timoteo. Surprised, Miguel takes out the chain given to him by his sister, which has Timoteo inscribed on it. He requests Tim to find his sister. When Tim asks where his sister is, we see a flashback of what happened on the audition day. Giselle is in a van with all the kids after the audition. She tells them the beach is the perfect spot for a photo shoot. Fuego closes the back door and drives them to a warehouse by the beach. They are then locked in a shipping container despite their cries and pleas. They are transported to the port of Cartagena. Fuego opens the door and the kids are lined up with Rocio tightly holding her brother. The guy who was earlier photographed with Ernst scans and picks Miguel. He is then taken to Mexico where his horrifying journey begins. Later, he is reunited with his father Roberto. At the station, Roberto breaks down saying one of his children's beds is still empty. While saying goodbye to Miguel, he takes his chain out and gives it to Tim, asking him to keep it. Meanwhile, in some shady room, a drunkard guy comes into the room where Rocio is seated on the bed, terrified. Later, she is in a tub crying, trying to console herself by singing. Meanwhile, Tim asks his boss to assign him to Rocio's case. But his boss says, Homeland Security cannot interfere in some other country's business. Tim explains his emotional trauma and breaks down, making his boss agree if only he keeps the budget below 10 grand and he is on a fake training schedule. Tim says goodbye to his family and lands in Cartagena, where is received by Jorge, a Colombian police. He takes him to meet a guy and explains that he has given his case to a non-police type and the guy has a lead. This guy is Vampiro, an ex-cartel who used to run a money laundering business during the 90s and did his prison time. Now he buys children, keeps them in safe houses and sets them free. Vampiro advises Tim to lighten up the way he dresses, rent an expensive black car, and act like a rich American to get inside the pedophile world. He tells Tim that Rocio can be in any part of the world, but he has found a girl matching Giselle's description who lures and kidnaps kids, promising to make them big in the entertainment world. She is Caddy, a former beauty queen who keeps her real name clean and uses the name Giselle to run her operation. When Tim asks Vampiro to set up a meeting with her, he tells him she only deals with street traffickers or people she knows and old friends. Later, Tim comes across the news of an American caught running a child sex club in Thailand. He calls Vampiro and tells him about his plan to build a child sex hotel only for members in Cartagena, which requires a lot of kids. Since the kids will be supplied by the child traffickers including Giselle, there is a high probability to find Rocio and rescue the other kids as well. He already has an investor, a billionaire real estate owner, Pablo, who has helped the police a couple of times before. Putting their plan into action, Vampiro takes a middleman to a grand house and tells him the plan to build an all-membership child sex hotel inclusive of everything. Tim tells he will need around a minimum of 50 or 60 kids. Tim tells him to contact others if he cannot supply all the kids alone. Jorge tails and takes pictures of him meeting Giselle and other child traffickers. Meanwhile, Tim is being pressured by his boss to come back home as this mission is taking nowhere. Unable to make up his mind, Tim meets with Vampiro and shares his dilemma. Vampiro tells his life story of how he accidentally slept with a 14-year-old girl thinking she was an adult when he just got out of prison and got suicidal. He decided to change his path and started saving children. Vampiro's story touches Tim's heart and he decides to quit his job and proceed with the mission without the police involved. Tim flies to where Pablo is and explains the new plan of not involving the police. He tells Pablo how the child sex trafficking industry has grown rapidly over the past few years and if nobody does anything, it is going to eat up the society. But Pablo refuses since he does not want to do it without the police. As Pablo sits in his car, his driver hands him an envelope, given by Tim, that has a photo of Rocio. Later, Tim and Pablo fly to Cartagena and meet Jorge and Vampiro. They plan to use an island to lure the traffickers with the kids and arrest them there. When Elle shows the luxurious island to the others, they are quite impressed, including Giselle. Pablo rents an expensive apartment and a meeting is arranged with the traffickers. Tim tells Giselle to bring no less than 50 kids to the island and she can take her 100 grand. Later, after the little party, Tim gets a call from his boss who tells him the U.S. Embassy in Colombia will track and support the raid and help if any legal backup is required. Tim and his team get ready for the big day on the island. Later, the traffickers arrive on the island. A new guy accompanies them, introducing him as Carney, their lawyer. All of them enjoy themselves with drinks as the money is handed over to the traffickers. Meanwhile, Tim informs Jorge to wait for the raid as the rest of the promised kids have not arrived. He also tells Jorge to take Carney separately and not to handcuff him. He sees Carney taking the boy, so he intercepts and tells him to pick another one as the little boy is his. This angers Carney and they both have a scuffle. Vampiro tells Tim to give what the man wants and pacifies the situation. At dusk, Jorge sees another boat with kids arriving on the island, so he signals his team to approach the island and take position. They approach stealthily, raids, and arrest all of them. But as instructed by Tim, Carney is taken away separately without handcuffs, making the rest believe that he is the informant. Later, Jorge informs Tim that 54 children have been rescued, but Rocio is not among them. While the rescued children clap and sing to their newfound freedom, Roberto sobs sitting on Rocio's empty bed. At the station, Jorge interrogates Fuego. Terrified after seeing the pictures of dead Carney, he reveals that Rocio was handpicked by him and sold off to the Scorpions' leader, a rebel group. Jorge briefs Tim that beyond the south of the Guaitara River is the rebel territory and the police nor the army goes there. Tim is still determined to save Rocio, but Jorge tells him she got sold to the wrong guy and it's beyond their ability to save her. Just as they seem to be on a dead end, Vampiro says that the medical people can go there to treat any kind of epidemic. To infiltrate the rebel area as doctors, they get their fake ID cards made and get a crash course briefing from a doctor about how to treat the current epidemic. As they are loading the medical supplies, Jorge tells them that he has orders not to go beyond the river. He gives them both a syringe that has a GPS tracker. They drive deep into the mountains, passing villages and giving out pamphlets and asking for directions. They camp by the riverside during the night. At dawn, they load their motorboat with the supplies and head off to the rebel territory while Jorge stays behind. After quite a bit of riding, Tim waves saying they are doctors as they come closer to another boat, but they fire gunshots. A few armed men come and check the boxes, confirming with their boss that it's just vaccines. The men asks for just one of them to come with them, so Tim volunteers. As the boat rides off, Vampiro informs Jorge that Tim is on his own now. They walk to the village on foot, passing through dense jungle without proper roads, and as they close in, Tim sees a lot of people harvesting coca leaves. Upon arrival, Tim meets the leader Alacron and tells him that cholera is spreading like wildfires in the nearby villages, and if he permits, he would like to check for anyone who has the infection and evacuate them. But Alacron burns the paper he gives him and tells him to bring any infected person found in the campsite. The bell rings signaling break time, and as the workers head back, Tim scans them looking for Rocio. As he moves further, he sees a group of workers and finds Rocio. He pretends to check on her and tells her he has come to help her. But before he can get more information about where she sleeps, Alacron comes and interrupts. At nightfall, when the rebels are merrymaking, Tim goes to some huts and checks for Rocio but cannot find her. He then goes to Alacran's room and finds Rocio sleeping there. He approaches her quietly and wakes her up, but she gets terrified and screams. Alacran abruptly stops singing and gets up to check on Rocio. Tim manages to calm her down and tells her to act normal or they both will get killed as they see Alacran coming. He comes to Rocio and takes her while Tim hides under her bed. But before Alacran can do anything, Tim attacks and kills him. He takes Rocio and escapes to the jungle, making their way back to the boat. One of Alacran's men comes to check on him but finds him dead. He alerts the others guarding near the riverbanks to check. But Tim and Rocio have already stolen one of their boats. Vampiro and Jorge see the tracker moving, and as soon as they reach, they get in the car while the rebels behind them fire at them. They narrowly escape and make their way out of the place. In the car, Tim places the chain Miguel gave him in her hands. She looks at it and then to Tim in silence. The next day, Rocio is still asleep in the hospital bed when a gentle hand wakes her up. Rocio has a tearful reunion with Roberto and Miguel, making Tim shed a tear looking at them. They fly back home, and as she enters her room, she sees the new drum her father has kept on her bed. She plays the drum and sings her sound of freedom. In the final scene, we see the real Tim Ballard and the real footage of the island raid. It states that he stayed back in Colombia and worked with Jorge to pursue other leads uncovered during the island raid. He and his team rescued more than 120 children and arrested more than a dozen traffickers. He attributes the inspiration for founding Operation Underground Railroad to his wife. This organization remains dedicated to rescuing children from sexual slavery and has successfully influenced the U.S. Congress to pass legislation mandating government cooperation with other countries on sex trafficking investigations.